Hello again, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for this Wednesday's edition of Alaska Weather, 8th day of September 2021. I'm Dave Percy, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting today's show. Up first, we've got the no hazards hazardous weather graphics with no hazardous weather highlighted on them. So no watches, warnings, or advisories out public-wise around the state for the next day or so. And from there, we'll just roll right into the satellite imagery and showing a couple of systems there. One lifting northward, well northwest of the western Arctic coast there, moving off into the Arctic, and another one moving across the Russian Far East. And then we've got moisture sliding northeastward, or eastward actually, kind of linking up a band south of Kodiak Island and moisture over the southeast Bering Sea. And that just starting to make landfall there across southern Kodiak Island, Sitkinak, Trinity Islands here during the afternoon hours. And then some moisture with remnants of a trough over southern Alaska there, Kenai Peninsula. Really not a lot of precipitation, pretty light rainfall amounts scattered around with that, just some scattered showers actually. Homer had about 1/100 of an inch, and the Nilchik had 1/1500 of an inch, so kind of varied there. Also, another trough over the Panhandle brought precipitation to that area, but the amounts are quite varied and variable. For example, over 1/2 inch of precipitation fell at Petersburg, but Wrangell only had 1/100 of an inch during the same time period. Otherwise, Hoona had about 1/2 inch of rain, and Juneau picked up about 1/10 of an inch of precipitation. And light rainfall amounts extended over much of the western interior, nothing more than like 10 to 1/1500 of an inch. Most areas saw less, some areas didn't see any at all. Otherwise, eastern interior, Devon Story, partly and mostly sunny, Copper River Basin, up through the eastern interior, all the way to the North Slope and areas of the Arctic coast, especially on the east side there, saw clear skies. As you can see over toward Barter Island and in the Mackenzie River Delta area, pretty good conditions there. Low pressure south of the Alaska Peninsula started bringing some rain into the area there. Sandpoint had about, they picked up, maybe 2/10 of an inch of precipitation. Coon Island there, east of Unalaska Island, they had about 1/3 of an inch with winds gusting up to 35 miles an hour there, and about 25 miles an hour for the wind gusts at Cold Bay. Otherwise, wind no factor at all anywhere else in the state. Light rain showers falling as far west as Adak and Atka. And for tonight, rain will continue to increase, but it'll be light rain, fog, and drizzle for St. Lawrence Island, with little increase in the wind speeds there. And that weakening front just trails southward there, bringing some showers across the Pribilof Islands. And then some more moisture just to the west of that keeps a chance of rain in over the western Aleutians. Adak and Atka should be dry. Chance of scattered showers eastern Aleutians, but windy for the Alaska Peninsula. Windy for Kodiak Island. Gale warnings, gusts to 50 miles an hour in the forecast with rain moderate to heavy at times. But then that lessens up the farther north you go, but rain and moisture will increase Cook Inlet, Kenai Peninsula, especially from south to north slowly, and should work into Prince William Sound late tonight. Interior stays kind of showery in the central interior with low pressure in the area there, but stays dry in the east and dry to the north and drying out for the southeast coast. Moving on to tomorrow, maybe some showers toward the eastern border of the Panhandle, and they may not even occur at all, but there is a risk. And better chance of seeing some sunshine as a ridge of high pressure moves through ahead of that slow-moving system there off to the southwest, or actually southeast Kodiak Island. That'll keep it windy and wet Kodiak tomorrow, and periods of rain, southern Kenai Peninsula, south of Kenai. Look for periods of rain, Kamishak, Kachemak Bay areas, and maybe some rain, mainly western Prince William Sound into Portage, maybe Girdwood. That's about all the farther east it'll get. Showers lingering with areas of light rain over the western interior from the Seward Peninsula to Togiak Bay. But to the north slope, maybe some breaks, sun breaks, Noatak Valley. And again on the north slope and the Arctic coast, areas of low clouds and fog possible. And it looks like rain, fog, and drizzle for the Pribilof Islands with that low complex frontal boundary that will drag across Adak westward to Shimia. And looking ahead to Friday, that system kicks off to the east into the southern Gulf of Alaska, with the front moving up to just off the coast. So good gale force winds along the panhandle. They're looking at 35 knots on the south coast, 40 knots on the north coast, southeast turning east for the eastern North Gulf Coast. In fact, 45 knot winds for the eastern North Gulf Coast in the marine forecast. Look for rain, moderate to heavy at times, from about Yakutat, maybe Cape St. Elias, right on down the entire southeast coast in the panhandle there. Otherwise, eastern interior, more clouds and some scattered showers from the eastern Alaska range up toward Eagle and then maybe into the southern Yukon Flats, but nothing too significant. Dry to maybe partly sunny conditions. For the northern interior, north slope, and not much change for the Arctic coast. Could be some clearing periods, and there could be some low clouds and fog, but definitely looks wet over the western interior from Kotzebue Sound, Selawik Valley southward into the Kuskokwim Valley, with a good shot of moisture coming in with that frontal system, and then moisture trails southwestward to the weak low center just north of Amchitka Island there, so it looks wet and maybe a little breezy for the Pribilof Islands. Definitely IFR flying conditions, and the weak trough will spread some scattered shower activity into the Fox Islands, with the Alaska Peninsula looking pretty good with weak high pressure resulting in partly to mostly sunny skies. And could even see some clearing late Kodiak Island with those northwest winds kicking in on the east side of the island there around the state airport. Definitely going VFR. And moving on to temperatures for tonight, upper 40s, lower 50s for the Panhandle, upper 30s Copper River Basin, 40s for the remainder of southern Alaska, except lower 50s Kodiak Island, and mid 40s for the Kuskokwim Valley. Highs tomorrow 58 to 63 for the Kuskokwim Valley, warmest in the north, and then upper 50s to lower 60s south central Alaska. Same thing for the Copper River Basin. Along the North Gulf Coast, southern Kenai Peninsula, highs in the mid to upper 50s, mid 50s Kodiak Island, and 55 to 60 for the Panhandle. That'll be followed by morning lows on Friday. A little milder, keep it around 40 at Gulkana. Some of the higher valleys there could see mid 30s possibly, but in the 40s, mid to upper for the remainder of southern Alaska. Lower 50s though, Homer to Kodiak, and lower 50s in the Panhandle, mid 40s Bristol Bay and the Kuskokwim Valley. Highs on Friday afternoon, 60-65, most areas east of the Alaska Range, even Kodiak Island with those northwest winds and any clearing at all, and you rise into the 60s there, with lower 60s possible along the Panhandle, mid to upper 50s Bristol Bay, mid 50s in the Kuskokwim Valley. Up to the north, lows tonight in the 30s, Brooks Range on out to the Arctic coast, 40s south of the mountains, followed by highs tomorrow, 60-65. Warmest in the east, Eagle, 66. Some areas could see 67, 68, maybe even 70 possibly. And mid 40s for the Arctic coast. Lows in the 40s south of the Brooks Range, 30s north of the mountains. And then highs back into the 60s, central eastern interior, otherwise in the 50s. Arctic coast, 40s, north slope, 50s. 40s for the lows tonight, Aleutians and the southwest interior to St. Lawrence Island, followed by highs in the lower to mid 50s over the southwest interior, and lower to mid 50s for the Aleutians as well as the Pribilofs. Staying in the 40s, St. Lawrence Island, followed by lows, upper 30s to lower 40s, and followed by highs in the lower to mid 50s, but mid 40s for St. Lawrence Island.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Traffic here Thursday morning. VFR, Arctic Coast North Slope, south of the Brooks Range, a band of IFR, Noatak Valley, across the northern central Kobuk Valley and northern Koyukuk Valley. VFR Eastern Interior, all the way down to Prince William Sound, Madanuska, Susitna Valley, northern Cook Inlet, Turnagain Arm, Prince William Sound, and the North Gulf Coast into, well, at least Elfin Cove, and then pick up marginal VFR to the east and southeast. Southern half of the Panhandle, IFR, Eastern Central Aleutians, IFR, and Northern Bering Sea, IFR, and that extends inland across the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, across Togiak Bay, Dillingham, southern Kuskokwim Valley to just west of Lake Iliamna, Seward Peninsula. And for the afternoon, afternoon Thursday. Band of IFR from the northwest coast across the Seward Peninsula, coastal areas of the Yukon and Kuskokwim Delta. VFR, though, breaking out around Bethel to the bay, and marginal VFR, central Aleutians, IFR, eastern and western Aleutians. IFR also Alaska Peninsula up the south coast there to Kodiak Island, and it breaks out to VFR there in the zone around Fognak Island, but IFR, Cook Inlet, Kenai Peninsula, maybe marginal VFR, possibly into the Manuska Valley and western Susitna Valley, otherwise eastern interior, VFR, central eastern North Slope Arctic Coast, VFR, Panhandle, marginal VFR. And for the day, or for the morning on Friday, we've got VFR holding north of the Alaska Range, all the way up to say near Barter Island. Otherwise, marginal and IFR conditions along the Arctic coast, mostly marginal for the North Slope, western central Brooks Range, DeLong Mountains IFR, and the lower Yukon River Valley area into the lower Koyukuk IFR. Also IFR from the Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Islands, Yukon Delta Coast, Nunivak Island. Just east of the Pribilofs, which means St. Paul, St. George, are marginal. Southern Bering Sea, mostly IFR, as well as the Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, VFR West, IFR East, Kodiak IFR, North Gulf Coast, Gulf of Alaska, all IFR in the Panhandle. In the afternoon, that burns off to VFR for the southeast coast, and a lot of VFR now over the interior with IFR up along the central eastern Arctic coast, IFR Kodiak Island, southern Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound. Narrow band, weakening band, thinning out band of IFR along the southwest coast, a little more extensive there over the eastern Bering Sea and the Pribilofs, and looks like some VFR showing up over the central and eastern Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula. Passes, Anatuvik and Atigan, both VFR tomorrow for Thursday. Lake Clark and Merrill, marginal VFR, lowest conditions eastern entrance, VFR on the west side. Rainy, possible marginal VFR eastern approach, otherwise VFR. Windy, VFR. Isabel, VFR. And Mintesta, looks pretty good, VFR also for Tanita. And Portage, marginal VFR and IFR becoming more likely on the eastern approach as you go through and into the afternoon toward evening. For Chilkoot and White, IFR becoming marginal VFR. Freezing levels, 4,000 feet right out over the near the Pribilofs, eastern Bering Sea there, with 6,000 feet along the Aleutians, and then back to 4,000 feet up around St. Lawrence Island, 6,000 feet in the interior, 6,000 to 8,000 feet over the Panhandle. Icing, look for considerable moderate rime icing, eastern Kodiak, Fognak Island, up to the southern coast of the Kenai Peninsula, possibly into Passes Canal, Whittier, maybe Portage, Homer, and Kachemak Bay. Otherwise, icing free for the Panhandle and the remainder of central northern interior areas. Icing possible for Bristol Bay and the Pribilofs. And for the jet stream, you can see two jets, westerlies, one over across the Bering Sea, 90 to 120 knots, the other one south of the Aleutians, 85 to 115 knots, and then southerlies up to 70 knots there right off the northwest Yukon Delta coast. 9,000 feet, 60 knot east-southeasterlies there, catching the southern Kenai Peninsula, 45 to 55 knots just north of the Aleutians, and then 30 knots across St. Lawrence Island off the north coast of the Panhandle, 45 to 65 knot winds with that low southeast of Kodiak Island. Translates to considerable moderate chop, Kodiak Island and the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula, say from near Sand Point, right up across Kachemak Bay, Kamishak Bay, southern Prince William Sound. Light to isolated moderate chop, eastern central Aleutians.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder. As you well know, you can get forecast information for any day of the week. Today, tonight, tomorrow, out to 6 or 7 days. It includes the high and low temperature, the wind direction, the chance of rain or snow in your part of Alaska. But did you know that there is information available to forecast out to 2 weeks? So the question is, how would you use that information? And here to answer that question today and tell us a lot more about climate services from the U.S. National Weather Service Alaska region is Rick Toman. He's the program manager for the Climate Science and Services. And Rick, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
How would we use information that is out to 2 weeks instead of just the high and low and the chance of rain?
Well, Dave, as we move out in time, of course, forecasts become more uncertain. So as we move into that second week from now, we're not looking at specific highs or lows or precipitation amounts at any given place. What we can do with the state of the science at this point is get a handle on patterns. So we can say things like increased chances for stormy weather in the Bering Sea in 2 weeks, or we've been in a cold weather pattern, looks like 8 to 10 days from now, that pattern's going to change. Those are the kind of forecasts that we can currently make in that second week.
So you're increasing lead time for perhaps big or small weather events and telling us the likelihood of maybe more coastal storms or wind events in some areas?
Those are the kinds of things that that we hope to be able to let Alaskans know in the second week forecast. And if you have an activity or an event that you would find that kind of advance notice useful, whether it's moving stuff off of the beach, whether to go out hunting or to come back from camp, those kind of decisions, the week 2 provides the opportunity for you to get a handle on that kind of information.
Okay. What other type of weather impacts that we're familiar with might Alaskans use climate services for?
Well, in the forecast realm, we can go provide some information from this week 2, say the 8 to 14 day period, on out to the monthly and even seasonal time scale. Now, those monthly seasonal forecasts are still kind of just really very much pattern dependent, and the amount of detail that we can provide at this point is still pretty limited. Generally, indications of how temperature and precipitation will fall in maybe above normal, below normal kind of range. But in the week 2 period, we can be considerably more specific than that as far as the general patterns and really the impacts on Alaskans.
Okay, so we would be talking about generalizations there that would tell us that the period might be more stormy, might be more hot, more dry, more cold, and situations like that.
That's correct. So we're not going to be able to say in which community, for instance, there's the threat of coastal flooding, but we can often be able to tell we're moving into a pattern that would be conducive to big Bering Sea storms. So if you're in an area that could potentially impact you, you'll want to pay attention to the weather forecast.
Okay. Now, every day and every hour of the day, the National Weather Service is working on a forecast for the next day. But how do you start your forecast process for that extended period that goes out beyond 7 days?
Well, the way things work right now, we start off with the expected general flow pattern for Alaska and the whole world, really, and then we narrow that down to Alaska. So we start off with the basic computer model forecast. There's quite a few different computer models that we look at, bring those together. And then another important part of that is we attempt to assess the confidence. The reality is often 2 weeks away, the computer models are very divergent. They have lots of different solutions, and that's an indication that we don't have much confidence. But when we see more agreement in that time frame, and when that agreement is a pattern that will be potentially very impactful for Alaska or is a big change from what we've been in, that's when we can then take that expected pattern. We have computer models forecasting it. We've assessed the confidence. Now we can move that forward. How, using our experience as Alaskan weather forecasters, how does that typically play out for Alaska? So is this a stormy pattern for the Bering Sea? Is this an extra rainy period for Southeast? Is this the kind of pattern that generates strong winds potentially in the Anchorage Bowl? Is this a deep cold pattern for the interior? All of those are the kind of things that we're looking at in these large-scale patterns. That's very different than telling you that the winds on 10 days from now are going to be gusting to 120 on the hillside. We're looking for patterns, not the very specific information that the Weather Service will then hone in on as the event gets closer.
So the idea is to keep the 5, 6, 7 day forecast the same, where you are getting the standard high and low temperature and the chance of wind or rain, but further out you get a broad general forecast, but as the time gets closer to that event, we'll get a lot more specific.
That's correct.
Okay, very good. So how can people use this information if I am out in the bush and I want to see, is a coastal storm expected in my region, or is a chance for that improving over the next 2 to 3 weeks? Where could I go to get information like that?
When we see that potentially impactful or a big change in the weather is coming 8 to 14 days out, typically we will start to highlight that on the Weather Service Facebook site. We might produce a YouTube video highlighting that, linking that on our Facebook site. So often we don't, at this point, we don't have much to say in that because we're really looking for those forecasts of opportunities. But one thing we can say very likely as we go through the next 2 or 3 years, there'll be more and more of this kind of forecast information available in that week 2 time frame.
Okay, and something that emergency managers and city planners and folks in villages might be interested in keeping an eye out for, looking for that information to be headlined, whether that's on social media or perhaps through the National Weather Service channels there to get information from you to make better plans a little bit longer term and make better preparations in the event that things become a little bit more unsettled.
Absolutely. Climate Services with the National Weather Service Alaska region is talking to the state of Alaska every week, apprising them of that 2-week outlook. And on the social media side, we are working to keep Alaskans informed so that when we think we have some confidence in a high impact or a big change, that's the best way right now for folks to find out about that. Twitter, Facebook, so stay tuned to your National Weather Service.
Very good, a developing program. Rick Thoman with the National Weather Service Alaska region. He's a Climate Science and Services Program Manager. Thanks so much for joining us again, Rick, and I hope to have you back again soon.
Great, thanks Dave.
For another edition of Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder. We'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Today's sea ice analysis there. Not much different from yesterday. Wrangell Island, still a lot of ice around it, of heavier ice, and the thinner ice still a fair distance off the coast, maybe a shade closer there on the eastern Beaufort Sea coastline than it was yesterday. And the forecast for the next 3 to 5 days is kind of a southward movement, or west-southwest movement, 10 to 15 nautical miles. And from there, we'll go to coastal water forecasts, and we'll see for the southeast coast tomorrow, small craft advisory, central and north coast, southeast winds 25 to 30 knots, 6 to 9 foot seas, and southerlies at about 15 knots on the south coast. Inner channel, south to southeast breeze, all of the inside waters inner channels at 10 knots with pretty slight seas at 2 feet. And then for the day on Friday, we've got small craft advisories developing over the central and southern inside waters, 25 knot winds with seas building 5 to 6 feet, Lynn Canal south at 20 knots. Otherwise, the coastline gale warnings, minimum gales on the south coast, south to southeast 35 knots, good gales on the north coast, sustained at 40 knots from the east-southeast, and seas 16 to just under 20 feet. And for Prince William Sound, small craft advisories for Thursday, east winds 25 knots, and gale warnings for the North Gulf Coast and the Barren Islands. All forecast to be out of the east at 40 knots with 11 to 16 foot seas. Gale warnings for Kamishak Bay, northeast 35 knot winds there. Cook Inlet, small craft advisories, northeast winds 25 to 30 knots, strongest winds south of the Forelands. And then for the day Friday, winds swing around to the southwest, northern Cook Inlet, drop down to 15 knots. Otherwise, small craft advisories for southern Cook Inlet, Kamishak Bay, where winds will be out of the west at 25 knots, seas under 10 feet. And small craft advisories for the Barren Islands and western North Gulf Coast, north to northwesterlies at 30 knots. But pretty good winds continuing there around Middleton Island, northeast, 45 knots, 17 foot seas. Another small craft advisory day in store for Prince William Sound with those north winds at 25 knots. Kodiak Island, east-northeast winds tomorrow. Good for gale warnings at 40 knots, and gale warnings Sitkinak to Castle Cape, northeast 45 knots, and from Castle Cape to Cape Sarachef, gale warnings northwest 40 knots. Cut that in half for the Bering Sea side of the peninsula, and Bristol Bay north at 20. Outlook for Friday, Bristol Bay all the way down to Cape Sarachef. southwest 20 knots, southwest 20 knots from Cape Sarachev to Castle Cape, and then Castle Cape to Sitkinak, small craft advisories, 25 knot winds. That also good up the east side of Kodiak Island. And for the Aleutians, west-southwest 25 to 30 knots for the Fox Islands, southwest 25 Adak and Atka, and west 25 knots Amchitka Island to Shemya Island. And then for the day Friday, Shemya to Kiska, northwest at 20, west 25 knot winds for Amchitka Island, Adak and Atka, southwest 20 to 25 knots, and for the Fox Islands, south to southwest 20 to 25 knots with seas as high as 8 feet. Southwest coast variable to west winds at 15 knots tomorrow. South 15 St. Matthew Island. Small craft advisories for the Pribilof. Southwest 25 knot winds. Southeast 15 St. Lawrence Island. Those become west at 20 for St. Lawrence Island on Friday. Gale warnings for the Yukon Delta coast. Southwest 35 knots. Small craft advisories everywhere else. Kuskokwim Delta coast south at 25. Pribilof's west at 25. St. Matthew Island southwest 25. Beaufort Sea coast, central and east side, east 15, northeast 15 on the west side, and then east 15 to 20 knots, Wales to Cape Beaufort. Then we've got small craft advisories, Cape Thompson to about Point Lay for northeast winds 25 knots, otherwise central coast northeast 15, and then 20 to 25 knot east winds for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. For tonight, light winds up there, dry, variably cloudy, areas of low clouds and fog along the coast, especially the east side. Otherwise, in the interior, 1,005 millibar low, kicking off a few scattered showers, a little more numerous there along and north of the mid-Yukon River there, Koyukuk Valley, so to speak, and scattering down into the western Alaska Range. But wind and rain rolling into Kodiak Island, heavy at times, moisture gradually increasing, Kenai Peninsula up into Prince William Sound. Weak front out over the eastern Bering Sea. Tomorrow just washes out into a trough along the southwest coast. Stays windy and wet, Kodiak Island, having trouble getting farther north, but look for the winds to increase definitely later tomorrow and tomorrow night there for the North Gulf Coast, and the Panhandle drying out.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.